We are on the frontiers of a new science. We're all starting to awaken to truths about who we are and where we're going. Open yourself to new knowledge about the power of spiritual energy and consciousness. Journey with Donna Smith-Moncrieffe as she takes you through the world of mediumship, energy healing, out-of-body experiences, past life regression, and all topics that demonstrate evidence of the true nature of our reality.
We're the circle leader probably for all of them in Sarasota, Santa Fe, and in Scottsdale, right?
Right.
Recently. Well, there was, right before I was doing my presentation, and I was actually hoping she could come after, a woman was sharing with me that William came through and asked for someone who died of an overdose, asked for whose son died of an overdose. Right, and she knew how many people. I mean, just to give our listeners an understanding. I mean, there's 30 people in each séance approximately, and maybe less at Scottsdale. I don't know. How many
30.
people had a son that died of an overdose? That's very unusual, and this woman did. And I'm reading actually the details that she wrote for me in the email, and it says, yes, he put his hands on top of my head, and he mentioned that, he was really sorry he hurt her, and he knew he had made mistakes, and he's relating back to the issue of the overdose. And that woman, just from following up and hearing from her again, her life is completely changed. She knows her son is still really, I don't want to say alive, but his spirit is still there. He's still
alive.
had the thought process and enthusiasm to actually materialize into that room and connect with her again. And just to move now, some other very interesting evidential pieces that go with this is that there was also, as you know, a very good medium, Suzanne Wilson, that was in those séances. And I've since, there's been some reports and things being followed up. She has indicated that she got through spirit and her spirit guides that indeed that was Sherry's son. So she got that. So we have not only Sherry the sitter, but we also have a medium who was there that did in fact validate through the guide that was indeed Sherry's son. What's very interesting about Suzanne Wilson's testimony, and she has written testimony about this, is that she gives further information, Tom, about what actually happened in the process of gathering the spirits before these séances. And she talked about it, things that you probably already know, but just to really paint this out and to hear it validated from another source, because, of course, Timmy's explained in different séances, you can hear him actually telling other people to hold on. It's almost like trying to explain to our listeners there's, groups of spirits just waiting. But she talks about it even more specifically. She mentioned that there was already a discussion in the spirit world about who would be selected, and there were challenges having certain spirits back off. So really, and I've heard this before. It's nothing that I haven't heard before. Even in mental mediumship, you can hear the mental mediums. I've heard John Holland, when he's on stage, talk about them all sort of crowding him and pushing. But this was very specific. She talked about it being a very coordinated effort in the spirit world, and how certain people needed to come through based on certain needs. And so to help our listeners understand is that perhaps some of the ones that come through, some of the factors I've picked up is the need, for example, in this overdose situation, perhaps he knew that his mother needed healing. I mean, this was a fairly young woman to have lost a fairly young boy, and not only the issue of need, but just also the issue of perhaps I've noticed, and you can comment on this, is those who visit physical mediumship seances are involved in spirituality, because this woman was a metaphysician. Perhaps their signals are stronger, and they're able to, there's some signal that's sent out, either being open, their energy, and they either seem to get more communication in a physical medium seance. And so there's so many factors that go into who is going to be connected. So I wonder if you want to comment.
Yep, it goes back to there being intelligence behind all of this. And
Yes.
I don't think one spirituality has a direct relationship to whether they get a loved one that comes in. But I'll give you a dramatic example of that. In the very first, and I would, as David's circle leader here, I would be the one to vet people. If I didn't know who they were, I would call them once they sent their registration form in. I'd call them and ask them, how did you hear about it? What's your interest and what experience do you have? Just looking to make sure that it's not somebody wanting to disrupt the experience. And this man and wife from New Jersey came to one of the séances in 2009. That was the first year that David came to Sarasota. And they were seated next to each other, which is David seats people according to their energy, and William is giving him guidance in helping with that. But they were seated next to each other, and Timmy says to them, there's a young man that wants to speak to you. And so it was, apparently they had a young man who was approximately 20 who had died. And so he comes in, as they all do who've never done this before. They come in very softly. They'll say, "Can you hear me?" Because I don't think they can really hear themselves speaking, the volume of their voice. So they'll frequently say, "Can you hear me?" But they get stronger as they get used to the ectoplasm. And he first comes to his mother and touches her. I think he kissed her on the cheek. And he says, she's so excited, and he says he's reassuring her that he's doing well and all of this. And then he steps just a few feet to the side where his father is. And he greets his dad. And then he says, "Dad, you've got to promise me you won't do it." And there's silence. And says, "Dad, you've got to promise me you won't do it." And the father says, "I can't do that." And he said, "But think about the effect on Mom, and think about the effect on his younger brother." Apparently, someone was either drunk driver, or they were on drugs, driving a truck down the road. This boy was walking home. I think he was like a 19 or 20-year-old on the sidewalk, and the truck went out of control and hit him and killed him. And so the young man is saying to his dad again, "You've got to promise me." And his father says, "Okay, I promise you." Well, then he dematerializes. Well, afterward, we had a chance to talk to the mother and father. And the father was planning to kill the man who had killed his son.
Geez.
Yeah, that stopped that. So I don't, in that instance, where's the greatest need? I think that's what the spirit people do. They'll know who's coming. They'll get with their guides and say, okay, who has the greatest need here? Whose life can be helped, in a significant way. That was very dramatic. In fact, I think that's David's team recorded that as a testimonial. It used to be on his website. I don't know if it still is or not.
Right.
But yes, there's a lot of intelligence behind it.
Yeah, no, and that's a great story, and so that kind of tells us it's not just about reuniting people, but some messages. And yes, and I can attest to hearing some of the messages. For example, I can remember in Sarasota last year, a father materialized and was able to encourage the daughter to let the mother who was ailing, she was either not well or something like that, to encourage her to let go. It's going to be okay. So encouragement about what is to come, the transition into the spirit world. And I think a lot of the messages, just from not only from the reunions, from Quentin Crisp and other entities that have materialized, for example, in David Thompson's séance, they do say give some important messages about social justice, about what does and what doesn't happen in the spirit world, what they do in the spirit world, what it's like. And I think, when we really think about it, we don't have a lot of outlets for direct voice verification. Of course, we do have an instrumental transcommunication. some types of audio communication. But with this, you're getting direct voice, but you're also getting the opportunities to actually sometimes touch. Now, I remember you talked about that being detrimental to the ectoplasm, but just to help our listeners, because of the stability sometimes that occurs in the room, some sitters are allowed at times to touch the entities, which is another form of validation.
Let me make a clarification here. They're not allowed to touch them. They're allowed to be touched, which is a difference.
But if you recall, Tom, that during the séance in Sarasota, a couple of us were allowed to touch Quentin Crisp's. He had on silk that day, and he wanted to demonstrate the kind of clothing that he wore, and I was able to also touch. Yeah, so what I'm trying to explain to our listeners is that there are specific times that they say, yes, would you, because I had William say, would you like to touch me? And it was his materialized fingers. And so I guess perhaps either the energy is stabilized at a point, or perhaps they either trust the sitter, but it's at those very rare moments the actual touching of the entity is allowed. And
what they do is because William, when people ask him questions generally in the beginning, he will, once he finishes answering the question, he'll approach the person and say, may I touch you on the head? And then you'll hear this sound. It's similar to the sound when they take on the ectoplasm, and then he touches them. So what they're doing, somehow they can protect the ectoplasm with some process, so that whether you're touching William's finger or Quentin's silk scarf or being touched, they're somehow protecting it, which makes it okay.
Yeah. Yes, that's right. And then that's such a critical point, because I don't want to mislead sitters that, you're always allowed to just put your hand on and touch. Because I can remember that very moment when I was asked, would I like to touch it? And I can even have the recording that says, I think I said something silly like, are you serious? It's such a colloquial way of talking. And here I am talking to, because, helping the listeners understand that with William, it's such a big presence when he's there. You're in the presence of someone from the spirit world. And here I am like, are you serious? Because I just couldn't believe that I was able to do it. And then he said something like, yes, I am permitting you. He's very formal, right? So these stories of reunions are really what I think at the heart, well, not the heart for everybody, but the heart for me about physical mediumship. Let's talk a little bit about some of the challenges. For example, let's say the spirit team are still demonstrating or validating these reunions, or generally some questions that people still have. Because my view on all of this is that I, for one, I feel that we have historical evidence and a lot of evidence that this phenomena is authentic. But I still think like there are things that we are still learning and discovering about the physical mediumship process and their efforts to increase validation. So let's start with a few examples of perhaps why, for example, Quentin Crisp, for example, tried to materialize his face. That didn't work exactly. What kinds of experiments are they trying still that may be working, some may not be working? Do they explain why the experiments are not working? I think that's an interesting point to discuss.
With Quentin, he was able, if I'm not mistaken, I could be, but he was able to materialize, but he was using a 5-inch by 5-inch square plaque with illuminated tape on it. And I looked at the tape later, and the tape had lost a lot of its luminosity, its ability to illuminate. And he was holding the plaque next to his profile, and some people were able to see a nose and things like that. But the tape wasn't bright enough to really light up his whole face. And again, that luminescent tape does not hurt the ectoplasm. And again, they just use it seldom. They use it rarely. But they, he was able to materialize, but people just couldn't see him clearly. And so that was an experiment. They did an experiment.
Right.
Well, you were there last year when they did an experiment with the healing, and that's probably for another program. But they did an experiment here in Santa Fe in the third séance.
Oh, yes.
William came in and said, when he was doing his opening comments, he said, we'd like to do something of an experiment, but it will shorten the amount of time that the séance will go for, and it will limit the number of people that can come in. And he asked if that was okay, and everyone said sure. So about 3/4 of the way of the normal time frame. Normally the séances go for an hour and a half to an hour, 2 hours. He came in and he asked the music person to put on the 2 coming out songs. And so once that was over, the circle leader says, David, are you okay? And you hear this, he's got a gag in his mouth. And so I had a little flashlight that I put together. I take it apart once I sit down, and after David's okay, I put it back together, and that's how I can find my way to where the lights are. And so I shine the light in the center of the séance, and this was in the theater of a Masonic temple, a very dramatic building in Santa Fe, and couldn't find David. I looked in the cabinet. I couldn't find him. What normally happens, Spirit levitates he in the chair he's strapped into, anywhere from 10 to 20 feet away from the cabinet that he starts out in.
Yes.
So I went and got the Masonic person representative, and we went back to the back room, and he turned the switches to turn the lights on. And there at the entrance to this theater, which could seat 200 people, was David. He'd been levitated more than 80 feet away, still in the chair, still bound, still gagged. It was dramatic. And he said afterward, I asked him, have they ever done that before? And he said the furthest they've ever levitated him was 40 feet. Well, in Scottsdale, when Quentin came in, I said, Quentin, I have a quick question for you. I said, when they levitated David in Santa Fe, that great distance, did they go around the chairs where the people were seated? The people were seated in a U, and at that open part of the U is where the cabinet is, where David is. Or did they go over the line of people and then up to the head of the theater? He said, William never does anything that is of a small value. They went over the people and levitated them up there.
They went over the people, 80 feet. And I think we really do have to just emphasize this. I know we're cutting close to the end of our show. It's hard to believe because there's just so much to talk about. But we really have to just ask people to look at that, 80 feet. What human being could pick up the medium's chair and the medium in darkness, and even if they tried to shuffle it, who could do that? Shuffle that without being heard by all of the sitters. But it was moved up and beyond the sitters and 80 feet.
Right, and you're looking at 200 pounds between David and the chair. What they both would have. It was a very heavy-duty chair. Actually, it was a chair I have here in my home, in my living room. And and just to clarify for people again, because I know we've had different shows, and again for people, I'll refer you to the research report that explains all of the protocols that go on before this. People are allowed to check the chair to make sure that it doesn't come apart, and that it's not able to be released and that kind of thing. There's just an enormous amount of protocol that goes into checking and having random checkers make sure that there are no extra props or anything like that. I mean, so people have. What's interesting about this levitation, is that correct, Tom? That they're using the remainder of energy that they haven't used for the various experiments during the séance? They're using
that whole levitation.
Well, what they're doing, they're using the ectoplasm, and there's a way, I don't know how it's done, but there's a way to form the ectoplasma in rods, and they are as strong as steel, and somehow they use these rods to actually lift him up and move him. Now, one other thing very quickly they did in Scottsdale, they levitated him, and they brought him over. I was sitting at the end chair, as the circle leader. I'm at the end of the U, and
yes.
They brought him over and they bumped him into me, into my right side, and it was like,
oh my God.
It was like they were just taking a, like a stuffed animal or something and just moving it very, very easily, very quickly. I could feel the straps on his hands, where his hands were strapped to the chair. They were bumping part of that against me, and then they took him and they took part of the chair. And I think they leaned it over and they bumped one of the back of the chair, the wooden backs, up against the ceiling, and then they moved him out and dropped him down to the floor. So again, they're using.
And that's to demonstrate just the fact that they have these abilities that are beyond, physical explanation.
Right.
Which I just think is fascinating. Now, Tom, we've come to the end of the show. I'm wondering if you could. I know for me, when I was first looking to experience physical mediumship, it felt like, how do you find an authentic physical medium? Where are these things happening? I'm wondering if you want to just share with listeners how they can learn about future séances that you might be participating on or putting on. I wonder if you could share that with our listeners.
Oh, sure. I have a website that I will put information about mediums coming to Santa Fe, and it's teachingsoftheangels.com. And they could also email me through that and ask about their particular area. I have, as I mentioned, I've sat for 30 years every week with 2 trumpet mediums, one for 33, one for 7 years, and so 40 years altogether. And so I'm connected to a kind of a worldwide, it's a loosely knit worldwide group that are involved in physical mediumship. And once you find one, many of these folks will have a website that you can become part of their contact group, whether you're notified of where they're going. But it is difficult. And another possibility, and see, not all spiritualist churches really focus or believe in physical mediumship. Some do and some don't.
That's right.
And so,
yes.
Are your own litmus.
That's not.
Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was just saying, so that's not a place for people to look. I think it's surprising. I was surprised when I was doing my research that the spiritualist churches, there's some concerns they have about not being able to identify actually the entity, and if we can't do that, then that for some reason seems to put the whole business of physical mediumship sort of in some type of doubt. So if you can go to your website, and do you also bring like Stuart Alexander or Scott Milligan? I know they seem to have their own in England, or do they ever come to the United States, for example, like David or Kai does?
Well, Stuart, I have sat with, there's something called Stuart Alexander and Friends Weekend. They would do it twice a year. Some years they do it once. I've gone to 4 of those conferences. I was last there and last year. And at the end of the conference, he announced that he's no longer going to be demonstrating publicly. Scott Milligan, I've sat with him. I'm working my desire is to bring him to the U.S. I don't know if he's ever been here or not. But there's there's a precipitated card medium named Hoyt Robinette, who is absolutely amazing, who lives in the U.S. But again, that's kind of a word of mouth. He doesn't have a website. But again, I have him coming here for the 3rd year. He'll be here in April. So.
Okay, that's exciting. No, so we will definitely check out your website. I know I will, because I'd like to continue experiencing the phenomena and following the new discoveries and the teams. And I think just before we end the show, Tom, I think it's important for our listeners to know, as you were explaining, the network and why, for example, it's not so out there, is just we just want to remind people that physical mediums do put themselves at risk, as Tom clearly explained, the issue of the unknown energies and potentially people trying to, grab entities, or the negative doubt that they bring to the seance. It just hurts energy, as well as the criticism sometimes that follow, because people were not able to, either maybe they experienced an inauthentic seance, or they cannot fathom some of the concepts that we talked about, levitation, people materializing. And so people like David Thompson, Kai Mugi, Stuart Alexander, and Scott Milligan, they all put themselves out there at a service to the spirit world, but at great risk.
Absolutely.
And so this is perhaps why it is not so prevalently out there, and why they are not so anxious to sort of tour the world and expose what I think is a gift to the world. So I want to thank you so much, Tom, for coming to the show. I know there's more discoveries. We will definitely have all of your contact information available for others. And thank you so much for coming.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you for allowing me to talk with you on this fascinating subject.
Yes. Thank you again, Tom. So we have heard about the truly remarkable experiences of materialization, where ordinary individuals in the physical world have had opportunities to touch, feel, and have a conversation with a loved one who passed into the spirit world. This is a phenomenon that we all need to awaken to and open ourselves to the possibilities. Go forth and experience your inner power, and use this knowledge about the true nature of reality to create great abundance in your life and peace on the planet. Join us next time on the Frontiers of a New Science as we explore topics of astral travel and its ability to contribute to both physical and emotional healing.
Join us each week as Donna Smith-Moncrieffe explores topics related to spiritual energy and consciousness. Collaborating with other experts, they will share evidence and ideas for you to integrate consciousness-based ideas into your life for a positive transformation.